Hey, what's going on? My name is Vit, and I've been wanting to make this video for a little while now where I kind of just sit down and talk about my experience playing Final Fantasy XIV. I'm coming up on almost 3 years playing this game now for the entire expansion. Thousands of hours played, and I figured it might be interesting to take a look back at that time spent and see a little bit about what it's like playing Final Fantasy as a new player going through an expansion. I started back at the tail end of Shadowbringers, going into the launch of Endwalker with just enough time to get caught up on the story. And this is pretty much the same place that players today, if you're just joining the game today, will find themselves going into the launch of the next expansion, Dawntrail. So I figured it might be interesting to take a little look at what it's been like. I've pretty much dabbled in every aspect of this game, going from a new player, this was my first ever MMO, all the way to an Ultimate Raider and completing what is widely considered as the hardest fight in this game, and Final Fantasy's raids are no joke. So some of the hardest raiding content out there in any MMO today. So it's been quite a journey, really. So hopefully this video will give some insight to new players, people coming to the game, people who are still considering the game, or it'll give an opportunity to us who have been playing the game for the entire expansion, just to take a look back and reminisce a little bit about the journey and what it's been like. So let's jump into the game and talk all about it. Okay, so like I said, this is my first MMO, and it definitely holds a lot of that magic for me that you might have experienced with your first MMO back in the day. Or if you're like me and never touched one before, it turns out this game is a really great place to start. At the time of recording this, I have almost 5,000 hours in this game, as much as that hurts me to say, and that number is just going to keep going up. It's really good, and I don't really have any intentions of slowing down anytime soon going into the new expansion. Some of that time was spent up front going through the story, but the bulk of it has been in Endgame doing a bunch of raiding, catching up on all the other things I've missed out on from past expansions, and just chilling out and enjoying whatever the game has to offer. It's been a lot, but I honestly don't regret any of that time spent. Now, the funny thing is that even with all of the time I've played and everything I've done, there's still a ton more I can go and do in this game. I haven't even scratched the surface on some huge parts of 14, and this game feels just endless in the best ways possible. So, again, my goal with this video is to highlight some of what makes 14 so good in my opinion. Hopefully this will help out if you're on the fence about the game, or if you want to know what makes this game worthy of thousands of hours of playtime. So let's get right to the heart of Final Fantasy XIV, and that is absolutely the story. If you told me 14 had the best video game story ever made, I'd honestly have a really hard time disagreeing with you. It's a Final Fantasy RPG through and through, and in my opinion, it's the best one in the series. I won't be talking about any plot points or spoilers in this video, so don't worry about that. I'll show some random fights and dungeons from different points of the game, as well as these launch trailers from past expansions, but it won't spoil you on anything, so don't worry. This game's story starts out slow, and it gradually ramps up throughout the expansions, building the world, the characters, and your connection to all of it. It does a great job with the feeling of starting a new adventure to the power fantasy of killing gods by the end in traditional Final Fantasy fashion. The zones, the scenery, the fights all tie it together and make for some truly memorable stuff. There are tons of classic Final Fantasy references throughout, and if you were to do nothing but play through the story and then quit the game, it would absolutely be worth it 100%. When I started this game, I just binged the story start to finish. I did some side stuff along the way, but I was just totally story focused, and I was hooked. Final Fantasy XIV is peak RPG storytelling, and it also has a soundtrack to match. There are so many absolute bangers in this game that it's insane, And some of them might not grab you right away if you were to go listen to them on Spotify or whatever with no context, but the way they fit into every scenario of the game so perfectly and highlight the storytelling is like nothing else in most games. There's such a unique style to the music of 14 where none of it seems cliche or predictable. Some of the tracks come so far out of left field and there's such a wide range stylistically that it keeps the game feeling fresh till the end. Now keep in mind the story is absolutely massive, likely 300 or more hours, give or take, to start fresh and get through it all to the final credits of Endwalker. And that's if you're not dragging your feet too much. This game's story has a 10-year legacy, and it's insane how many details from the very beginning stay relevant until the end. I won't go into the details to avoid spoilers, but just about every character or plot point ties into the greater story arc perfectly, with no loose ends left untied the entire time. Everything that happens in the story turns out to be meaningful, and by the time you get to the finale of Endwalker, the payoff is so huge from every detail building upon itself and creating this world that you just live in. The story also sets up a unique connection between you and this game that carries on after the credits. You really can't go through this massive story and not fall in love with this world and its characters. It is absolutely a must-play story. However, if slogging through 300 hours of cutscenes and dialogue boxes is just completely unbearable for you, or if you just need to get to high-end rating or whatever else ASAP, there is some good news. Endwalker wrapped up this 10-year story perfectly. There are very few plot threads, if any at this point, going into the next expansion, and if there was ever a time to skip the story, it's now. You can buy a story skip to get to the start of Endwalker and a job level skip to get your character to level 80. That would cost you about $50 US, and you'd still need to speedrun Endwalker and the final 10 character levels, but that would go relatively quickly. And before you crucify me for saying this, people tend not to like story skippers in this game, but you'd undoubtedly have moments moving forward where you don't really know what's going on or you don't recognize the characters, but Dawntrail is supposedly the start of a new story arc, and I don't think it would be as bad as if you were dropped into the middle of Stormblood or something with no context. And look, I'll always recommend people play through the story. I've watched every main story cutscene and read all the dialogue myself. I was completely addicted to it when I was starting out. And I think if you skip the story, you will get less enjoyment from all of the endgame stuff compared to someone who has that deeper connection to the game. But if the story really is killing the game for you, I do think it's better to skip it than to not play at all. The endgame and raiding is such a blast in this game, and the vast majority of my time is spent not thinking about anything related to the story. So take that how you will. There's still a lot of joy to be had, even if you don't play the story. And on that note, I want to talk about the actual combat in 14. It's by far my favorite thing about this game. Everything from how the jobs work and interact with one another, to the fight mechanics and the fight design, or even just sitting in front of a striking dummy and learning your rotation on different jobs. It's all just really fun to play. Each job in the game has quite a few buttons, some more so than others, and to play optimally, you need to press all these buttons at the right time and in the correct order, usually while dodging mechanics. And most of the time it ends up feeling like you're playing a rhythm game instead of a typical third-person action game with how precise things can be. There are currently 19 jobs in the game, soon to be 21 in Dawntrail, all with different weapons, abilities, and playstyles. The beauty of it is that you can play any or all of them on a single character. It honestly reminds me a bit of, say, Monster Hunter, where you can use a bunch of different weapons and all of them are viable and all of them play differently. Some might be better than others at certain things, but you can really play whatever you want with a different spin on things. Leveling all the jobs and learning how they all play has been one of my favorite things to do in-game. It makes the already huge amount of content in this game that much more replayable. There are roughly 90 dungeons, just as many boss fights, or trials as they're called, 76 or so raids with multiple difficulties each, and 5 ultimate fights, each one playable on all 19 jobs. It's a lot. Leveling these jobs can be a little slow, especially when you don't have some key abilities unlocked early on, but by the time you hit max level, every job in the game has moments that are extremely satisfying. We all have our preferences, of course, but I'd say every job is fun to play in its own unique way. There's also quite a high skill ceiling to many of the jobs. They're pretty easy to pick up, but can be really hard to master with a lot of intricacies that you might not even think about in the beginning. Add on top fight mechanics and everything else, and it can be a lot for a new player. It all just comes from time and practice, but you can certainly get there. Clearing a lot of the optional content as you go through the story can be a good way to get some extra practice early on. I found myself wishing that the story had a lot more combat, but if you take your time and do some of the raids and maybe jump into some extreme trials along the way, it would likely be much better. The fights in this game are all really top-notch too, so you can't go wrong. 14 actually does a really good job with its difficulties as well. You can go from story trials and alliance raids to normal raids, extreme trials, savage raids, and then finally ultimate. There's always something for whatever your skill level, and it would likely take you years of playing before you're hitting the upper end of the skill ceiling and start feeling like you've mastered anything, let alone just finishing it all. I know I'm definitely not there yet after almost 3 years of playing. To be fair, I've been pretty casual with my raiding, meaning I only have done groups that play for a few hours, a few nights a week. Some people take it much more seriously and do big long hours and get a ton of practice on the fights and get things done a lot quicker. So it's really up to you if you want to play this more casually and take things at your own pace. But if you really hammer down and, try to get through some of this harder stuff quickly, you certainly can, so you kind of take it however you want. And at the end of the day, hitting the boss is fun. Some people are maybe a little more goal-oriented than me, and maybe they feel like they need to clear fights ASAP, but I'm usually having a good time even if things aren't going totally to plan. One thing I learned very early on with this game is that when you're playing and learning any of the more difficult content, your time is usually spent dying and resetting over and over again. And then you get the occasional win eventually. So just get used to dying a lot. Learning to enjoy the struggle makes this game much less frustrating. Dying or making mistakes in a video game is just not that serious, and whether you're in harder content in the end game or if you're just going through the story, try not to be so hard on yourself or the others that you're playing with. If you're learning from mistakes, you're making progress, and of course there's a time and place to take things a little more seriously, but when I learned to laugh off some of the dumb mistakes I make or some other people make, the game became much less stressful and more fun. When I managed to beat the hardest raid in this game a few months ago, it took literal months of practice and over 2,000 attempts to do so, but it was one of my favorite video game experiences of all time. The feeling of accomplishment conquering that challenge, along with the sheer freedom once it's done, is incomparable. You come out on the other side with a sense of renewed confidence, and I believe there's some sense of self-improvement on multiple different levels that happens when taking on these challenges, even at lesser extremes. This game's pretty special in that regard, and it can very quickly become more than just pushing buttons for fun. And even if you're not into all the sweaty raiding in this game, there is more than just one game that you can play here. Play it like Animal Crossing and get into crafting, gathering, housing. You can do nothing but fishing and it would be an incredible fishing game. There's Deep Dungeon, basically a self-contained roguelite dungeon crawler where you can level your character as you climb through the floors and have to reset back to level 1 if you die. It's pretty simple in concept, but can be some of the most intense gameplay in Final Fantasy XIV. There are some more old-school MMO grinds in the exploratory zones, Eureka and Bosnia, and have fun losing experience and de-leveling in there when you die. You can catch them all with Blue Mage, where you learn spells and abilities from a ton of enemies throughout the entire game. And we're getting Beastmaster in Dawn Trail, where we'll be able to likely catch and tame even more enemies to fight for us. You can collect all the other random BS in the game like mounts, minions, outfits, triple triad cards, relic weapons, housing items, music, and achievements, and probably much, much more. There's so much stuff in this game that just managing your inventory can feel like a game in itself. The PvP in 14 is surprisingly good too. You can play it like Overwatch style games in 5v5 Crystalline Conflict. You can play the mess that is big team 72 player Frontlines, or a smaller 48 player MOBA style Rival Wings. PvP gets its own unique sets of skills and abilities for all the different jobs as well. I managed to climb through ranked Crystalline Conflict and got to the highest rank, Crystal. Queue times for PvP can be a little hit or miss, and so can your teams as with any game, but it's genuinely fun for the most part. There's chocobo racing, gambling, and other mini-games at the Gold Saucer. Brush up on your photography with the elaborate G-pose system. And I mean, I built a whole photography studio in my spare apartment in-game. You can even go to literal in-game nightclubs with real DJs playing live music and other player-run RP venues like cafes, taverns, and other more questionable establishments, if that's what you're into. But the coolest part about all these different facets of the game is that you could really main any one of them. Be a fishing main, a housing main, a PvP main, deep dungeon main, or just sit around and RP with your friends if you want. It's surprising how deep every side of this game goes, and there really are a ton of dedicated niche communities for just about any specific thing you could possibly do in 14. You could spend all of your time doing any one of these things, or if they don't speak to you, you can straight up ignore them with no harm done. Final Fantasy XIV does a really good job letting you spend your time however you want. So with that being said, what does the day-to-day of playing this game actually look like when you get to the end game? Well, if you're not into raiding, you can spend all your time doing any of the stuff I just mentioned, and you don't even need to be max level to do the majority of it. However, if you're looking to do current raiding on release, there's really not a huge time commitment to get into it or to keep it up. Getting into normal difficulty raiding takes almost no prep whatsoever. Just going through the story and picking up whatever gear along the way will typically be good enough to get through it. If you want to get into the higher difficulty Savage raids or even just raise your item level, this is where the real endgame gearing loop comes in. You can get started by either buying gear on the market board or by crafting it yourself, although that's a bit tedious if you don't have crafters maxed out and geared. That can be its own project in itself. I went through that earlier on and it was worth it, but it took quite a bit of time. So buying it on the market board's a very straightforward way to go. Then over time, you can slowly upgrade your gear with the weekly tome currency and drops from the Savage raids. Capping your weekly currency might take an hour and a half of playtime per week just casually running endgame dungeons, and it's really not bad at all. You'll get a new piece of gear every week or two, and if you don't care about raiding, this is still worth doing to get decently geared and make sure you have the base item level for future content. Clearing the Savage fights definitely takes a bit more effort, and then to get loot, you actually have to win a roll against your party for any drops on top of that. And good luck. Many of these Savage drops are typically the best gear you can get, and are necessary if you plan on doing ultimate raids after the Savage tier releases. Normal and Savage raid loot is weekly locked at 1 clear per week, so get to work on clearing those fights ASAP and get your weekly loot. If you're in a good consistent group, you can do your weeklies in a couple hours and then farm your currency whenever you feel like it. The system definitely has its ups and downs, but it respects your time pretty well. If you ever wanted to take a break for a few weeks, there's no fear of missing out, no harm done in not playing constantly if you don't feel like it. Overall endgame is just pretty chill. You can actually get a taste of this as you're still going through the story, too. The same endgame loop has existed for all of the past expansions. You can find all these same systems at level 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90, Old endgame gear gets outclassed immediately as you level, and it's not really needed for the story content, but you can at least see how it works early on and potentially gear up for old fights if that's something that you wanted to do. One of my favorite endgame activities has been doing the Unreal fights every week. These are just old extreme trials that get circulated in from past expansions every so often when the patches drop, but they're scaled up to max level. You can do these twice per week and earn some really cool and expensive mounts and minions that you can use or sell for tens of millions of gil. And I actually went through a phase of farming and selling these corgi puppy minions. My puppy mill was quite profitable, and each one sold for about 5 million every couple weeks. Endwalker also introduced a new type of content called Criterion Dungeons. These are harder 4-player dungeons that are more comparable to Savage Raid difficulty. These can be a great way to get into raiding if you can find just 3 other friends. It makes it easier to get your feet wet with raiding and have some fun compared to trying to organize a full 8-player party for traditional raiding. And as we all know, organizing 8 people is most of the struggle in getting these fights done. These Criterion dungeons also have some of the most fun and best designed fights in the game. There's even a higher Savage difficulty for these dungeons where you can't make any mistakes and you need to clear the entire dungeon quickly without dying. There are even more options at Endgame for casual content. Things like treasure maps where you can hunt for rare items and big money, hunt trains where everyone goes around killing rare spawns in the overworld for currencies, fate grinding, mount farming, mentor roulettes, and much more. If anyone tells you there's nothing to do in 14, they've either played the game for thousands of hours and did all of it, or there's just nothing that they feel like doing right now. This game is practically endless. One thing that I honestly didn't expect when I was getting into this game was just how many friends I'd end up making along the way. And as a total introvert, I went into this game just wanting to play solo, not really looking to meet people or make any friends, but I've somehow ended up with a bunch of different friend groups in game that I just kind of stumbled into somehow. I've met a bunch of different people through joining different raid groups, bouncing between a few free companies or this game's version of guilds, getting invited to random Discord servers, hanging out and watching Twitch streams, getting dragged along to hang with friends of friends, and literally just having people walk up to me in cities and strike up a conversation. You'll often hear about this game for having one of the greatest communities, and I think after spending a few years here, I would agree that that's true. People clearly love hanging out and running content, talking about the game or real life stuff, or helping you out in any way that they can. It's been awesome seeing how down to help people are when it comes to just about anything in game. And if you're new to this game and want to make some friends, a surefire way to do so would be to join a free company. Someone will probably just invite you to one randomly before too long, but you could easily find a good one if you look on the official Community Finder website, or just ask around in-game. People will gladly take you in. People also advertise them in chat all the time. Every free company I've been in has always been super friendly and welcoming, with people there to say hi every time you log in. It's really quite nice and a great way to make some connections and find people to play with. Most people are happy to hang out regularly and can help out if you are new and have questions about the game. There's also just very little toxicity in this game in general. Sure, you get a few bad apples, as with anything, but the game never incentivizes it in any way. There's always a bigger sense of cooperation than competition, and that shines through in how people treat one another. You really shouldn't worry about making mistakes or having people give you a hard time. It's very easy to spot a new player, and as long as you're willing to learn from your mistakes and take feedback, you'll have no problem. If you just say, "my bad," if you screw up, and communicate like a normal human being, people are typically very kind and forgiving if they see that you're trying. This goes for both your first time in a dungeon, or if you're learning an ultimate raid. If you die and the party wipes, you just go again. It's really not a big deal 99% of the time. If you're really struggling, just stop and ask questions. There's no better way to get past the stress of playing the game or making friends, other than throwing yourself in the deep end. And on the rare case you do run into some insane person, it's usually just very funny. If you're looking for a place to hang out, people to play with, or just want to ask some questions, I'm working on getting our Discord server up and running, and we'll link it in the description. This is literally my first video here, so things will be a little slow going to start, but hop in there and say hi. I'm happy to help out, and I'm looking to do a ton more videos moving forward, and keep growing this channel as we move into Dawntrail. I'd love to build a little community where we can hang out and just enjoy the game together. Right now I'm currently working on finishing up Dragonsong's Reprise. I'm just about at the end of this ultimate raid, and that'll wrap up both Endwalker ultimates for me once it's done. I'm also on the Mentor Roulette grind right now, helping out new players clear whatever random content the game throws me into. Both of these have been a fun way to fill the downtime before Dawntrail, and I really can't wait to play this new expansion. But I also wanted to do things a bit differently than I did in Endwalker. I figured starting up this channel would be a good way to keep things interesting for myself and see where we end up after another 2 years or so playing this game. No clue what to expect, but we will find out. If you're still considering whether or not you should play Final Fantasy XIV, my recommendation should be pretty obvious by this point. Yeah, it has its flaws, the main story questing is a little tedious, some of the game's systems feel a little bit dated, and it will likely consume your life, but no other game out there will come close to the experience that this game can provide. It really is something special. If you like this video, be sure to toss a sub to the channel if you feel like it. It would really help out as I'm just getting started and have lots planned here. Be sure to hop in the Discord too if you're interested in that, and we'll see you in there or in the next video. Catch you later.